Gary, on behalf of ExecuNet's members, I want to thank you for taking the time here. I know you've been a crusader against management as usual. I'm wondering whether challenging economic times present any new opportunities for people who want to challenge old hierarchical systems or any system that might be underperforming.
It's probably a difficult time to be an organizational renegade. I think most people simply have their heads down, and and a lot of them are glad to have a job at all. So it takes maybe an extra measure of courage in this environment to kind of speak up and challenge the status quo. Having said that, you have to separate out the secular ups and downs of the economy, and it looks like we're probably going to go into another recession here, from some of these deeper secular trends that are kind of challenging management as usual. So, we still live in a world of wildly accelerating change. We live in a world where competition is getting fiercer by the day, where the winds of creative destruction are blowing harder. In every business today is a creative business where simply having a knowledge advantage is no longer enough. So in those circumstances, we still need to manage in very, very different ways. We need organizations that are more adaptable, that are more innovative, that are more inspiring places to work. And that's going to take some fundamental change to our old hierarchical bureaucratic models, which, despite all the talk about the new economy and Web 2.0 and so on, the standard operating system for our organizations is still a 100-year-old bureaucratic model.
Okay. What are the essential ingredients, for building an organization that's adaptable and inventive, particularly in challenging times?
I think you have to kind of do a bit of a diagnosis and understand why our organizations are in some ways fundamentally incompetent. Because, companies are pretty good at doing some things. They're very good at discipline, focus, alignment, control, efficiency, but they're not so good when it comes to adaptability, innovation, and so on. You have to kind of unpack and understand why. And I would argue, and it's a multi kind of varied answer, but I would say one of the primary things that makes organizations less adaptable, less innovative, is they tend to be overly centralized. So if you think about in the past few years, how many organizations have missed big turns in the road? We don't have to name names, but there are a lot of companies that, if you went back a few years, they were on everybody's most admired list, most innovative list. They're not there now. And when you go and you kind of unpack that, what you find is that in many of those organizations, they had concentrated the responsibility for setting strategy and direction at the top. And so a very small number of people was able to hold the organization's capacity to change hostage to their own personal willingness to adapt and change. And so when they couldn't write off their own depreciating intellectual capital, when they got caught in old legacy beliefs, the whole organization stalled out. So I think you can't build any of these new capabilities without dramatically realigning power in organizations. And my argument is that the work of managing and indeed the work of leading needs to be pushed more and more out to the periphery of organizations, and that means giving people much better information at the front lines. People on the front line should have as good information as the people sitting at the center. It means bit by bit, wherever we can, expanding their scope of autonomy and control so they have the ability to make the right trade-offs and the right decisions given those local circumstances. Of course, we have to hold them accountable. They have to be, every employee, every small team needs almost an individualized P&L so they know exactly what am I being held accountable, how am I being measured, but with that, the autonomy to make the real-time decisions for the company. And then, of course, a short feedback loop where people understand, gee, given that decision, how did I do? So when you put those things in place, you can have an organization that's much less centralized and much more responsive.
Does that force people to step outside of themselves to some extent? And does it force them to step outside of their own boundaries or networks to sort of achieve that connection with the periphery, as you described?
Certainly to step outside of themselves. In our traditional organizations, there's kind of one dominant hierarchy. And people are given power kind of structurally and prospectively. I make you a vice president, and now you have this degree of discretion and authority over these individuals. I think that's going to disappear over the next few years. I think that power in organizations is going to be much more fluid. It's going to be like it is on the web. It comes from the service you provide to other folks, to the community around you, to your peers. Because wherever you look in human endeavor, you'll see hierarchy. There's hierarchy on the web. There's some bloggers who have a bigger audience. There's some people on forums who have a bigger share of voice. You look at Amazon, some of their reviewers are ranked higher than others. So there's always going to be a hierarchy. But in the online world, those hierarchies are built bottom up. And the moment you stop adding value and you stop serving the community, your power immediately starts to drain away. in organizations, people tend to have power often long after they stopped adding real value, or maybe they weren't adding much value in the first place. So I think what's going to change is, you're absolutely right, my authority, my influence is going to come from my network, from my ability to lead truly, rather than to lead as a function of my positional authority. And there are a few very progressive organizations that are already moving in that way. I think more and more will follow.
Okay. It almost sounds like business and management needs some form of intervention tool or vehicle to let those who are learning new and dynamic things on the edges get the attention of management. Is that
and have more influence? Yes. I mean, I think one of the other things that I think has often made organizations slow to respond to change. Not only do you have the problem of, often the folks at the top have a lot of their emotional equity invested in the past because they built the past. They have decisions made 5, 10, 15 years ago that they still feel compelled to defend. But I think what you also find is that the weak signals out there in the environment that portend kind of fundamental radical change, by the time those signals aggregate, collate, fight their way up, and become a big enough issue to attract the attention of somebody at the top, it's already too late. In fact, the way I like to say it is, by the time you know you need a change program, you're behind the curve. Right? So what we have to have instead is really a combination of A, a lot more discretionary authority at the front lines, but B, using the corporate equivalent of tools like DIG and so on, where you look at the whole organization as a sensing mechanism. Every day, people are out there saying, gee, I read this article about a competitor. I heard this thing from a customer. As an example, Best Buy, which is getting pretty smart about this, every one of their store clerks across all the Best Buy stores now, when they hear a customer say anything that's kind of like a problem, or why don't you carry this brand, or I'm frustrated about this, they have an incentive to enter that right then and there on their terminal. And I think the last time I checked, they were getting 6,000 of these a week that all get collated, and you say, okay, gee, previously that employee would have maybe said nothing. That was the most likely scenario. Might have said something to the store manager. Now, right there, real time, we can hear what's on their mind, we can collect that together, and we can respond as a company. So the combination of more discretionary authority and making it much easier and much more quickly for those weak signals to aggregate and come together in a way where you see the pattern and you can take action, that's going to be critical.